Welcome to B2B Commerce Uncut, a journey through change. On this podcast, we have honest, hard-hitting conversations with thought leaders, distributors, and innovators in digital commerce and transformation. We explore not only the success, but also the challenges that manufacturers, distributors, and wholesalers can face in achieving successful digital transformation for their companies. This episode is brought to you by Oro, a leading innovator and provider of customer-driven, powerful, and connected open-source software for B2B digital transformation. Oro seeks to build long-term, trustful relationships with its customers, integrators, developers, and technology partners by empowering people with the best tools to digitalize their business. Find out more at oroinc.com. That's OROINC.com. And here's your host, Sawyer Frank.
Welcome, everyone, back to the B2B Uncut podcast. My name is Sawyer Frank, and I'm your host for today. Very excited to welcome Mark Brohan, and hopefully I'm pronouncing your name right there, Mark. I know you're a legend amongst us in the e-commerce world, been obviously covering this industry for quite some time. So hopefully you can introduce yourself a little bit further to our audience here and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I like to, one of my stock phrases for this kind of event these days is dinosaurs still do roam around the earth a little bit. And I say that because I go back to almost the beginning of e-commerce. We launched Internet Retailer Magazine. I was the editor of it in 1998. And so we were there when Amazon was 2 years old. We were there 2 years before the .com and the B2B world debuted in 2000, if you will. So over the course of a lot of years, and then I was our director of research for 15 years at Internet Retailer. And I'm the guy who basically wound up creating a database that ranks 6,000 online retailers across the globe on web sales annual metrics. So I grew up on both sides of e-commerce. And my colleague Paul and I have been covering the B2B side since about 2000. So my point is, we can take a very long and realistic and detailed view of where e-commerce has been, and more importantly, where it's headed. And in the end, what we are is just journalistic researchers, more or less. We're reporters, we're journalists. So we like covering e-commerce is kind of what we do. So we just talk to people all day long and then benchmark the trends. It's as simple as that is what we do. So it's fun, keeps me out of trouble.
Well, I think it's hard for a lot of people not to look into the past, but obviously I think we need to be focused on the future here. I'm interested to better understand from you, moving into a new year here, 2024, it always seems like it's going to be the year for the big year, the big boom for B2B commerce. But what do you think are some of the biggest trends in the market right now?
Well, it's funny. I consider myself almost the e-commerce historian because I've seen it all, So even though B2B is entirely different from business to consumer online retail, there are some benchmarks. And you can see, if you look at the metrics the right way and talk to people about what they're doing and what they intend to do and how soon they do it and the results of it, you can see the sea change or the shifts in the market coming. Now, it's old news, of course, that digital buyers flock to more digital channels during the pandemic. Old news, if you will. Old news that it accelerated across the board, digital commerce and digital transformation. Old news. What is news, though, is that you've got an entirely different genre of more younger, digitally minded business buyers. And what they do is they will engage with a B2B seller organization, be it wholesaler, retailer, manufacturer, marketplace operator, somebody in between. What they will do is they will visit that particular B2B seller across anywhere from 3 to 10 channels. And all of those channels are digitally driven. So one of the biggest shifts in B2B commerce is, for e-commerce transactions, the platform stuff, the site stuff, the app stuff, that grew 18% last year and is now a $2.2 trillion market just in that. So yeah, that's a big world right there. But the broader picture is that it's an omni-channel business to business environment, but between 3 channels or 10 channels, depending upon who you are and how you do it, all of those are digitally driven by more self-service oriented, younger B2B purchasing teams. And that is one of the trends that's accelerating all of this transformation for more B2B digital across the board. And what also has changed is the expectations of what this younger B2B buying team wants to do on a platform, and they're very unforgiving. They will take up to a month and sometimes 3 months to look at anyone to 1 of 10 sites before they pull the trigger on a transaction. So as a B2B seller, if you think you're not being scrutinized by B2B buyers out there, think again. So they scout you out. They look at you, and they look at you not just on what you're offering on the e-commerce site or potentially what's behind the firewall, which is what passes for a lot of e-commerce today. They want to know, do you have the products, the services, the pricing, the features, the functionality, not across just the e-commerce world, but across up to 10 digitally driven channels. And that is the challenge. And those are the opportunity for the B2B buyers and the B2B sellers. So if you're a selling organization and you can meet that criteria, then it's a very rosy future for you. And if you can't, it's not going to look so good because it's pretty fast moving these days. So in a microcosm, yes, the market is shifting dramatically. The market is growing by X amount, and it's nothing sort of a sea change. The sea change doesn't happen in a semester or a quarter or a year. It takes a couple, 2, 3, 4 years to believe. But from our vantage point, the numbers that I gather and the people we talk to, that sea change is now 3 years in, and a lot of permanent shifting is occurring and will occur more. That's the status quo. That's where it's at.
Excellent. So I think there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, obviously starting with the evolution of the buyer, right? I think in our perspective, we're even seeing businesses being handed down from generation to generation. And the reality is, this new generation is having different expectations on how they buy products online. And as a result, looking at it through the lens of their customers. Beyond that, I think, you mentioned these different channels, and a big buzzword in the industry right now, I would say, at least from the vendor perspective, is unified commerce. I'd be interested to understand, how do you think that this term differs from omni-channel? To you, how would you define unified commerce? And I guess from your perspective, does it differ from omni-channel?
Well, I mean, it depends on which buzzword you want to use. But I mean, it could be connected commerce or omni-channel or whatever term you want to use. But in the end, the definition is the same, which is the B2B buyer engages with the B2B seller across a multitude of different sales channels, and how effective that digital seller is in connecting with that B2B buyer across the channels they choose to use to engage with you as a seller. That's just the definition of it. So that is what could pass for e-commerce, connected commerce, omni-channel commerce, but that's what it is, but let me give you an example. Here's an example. Historically, healthcare e-commerce has been a very cloistered, small world. Healthcare is unto itself. If you've worked in healthcare, and I have for many years at a time or two, it's very insular. And you have to be from healthcare to understand it. And if you are not from healthcare, you sometimes spend a lot of money and coming away not understanding it, and you call it a failed business. But for instance, if you look at the e-commerce lifestyle of the 25 largest enterprise healthcare systems, which make up the majority of, healthcare purchasing for the $18 trillion healthcare industry, there's a closed world. the top 25 healthcare enterprise organizations, i.e. big hospital chains, they use the same buyers day in, day out because they were vetted, new healthcare, so on that. So all of that. What changed was during the pandemic, because there wasn't a much product to go around. Suddenly you had these enterprise organizations flocking to B2B marketplaces. Couldn't get enough of it. Why? Because the traditional customer journey, digital or otherwise, couldn't produce what they needed when they needed it. So they went to new forms of digital commerce, primarily marketplaces, to find what they needed. So that was a big sea change for just one vertical market. And I could magnify that across other industries, including steel, uh, chemicals.
Mhm.
Uh, the service world is very big on this. Logistics is another big on this. So, we track more than 500 B2B vertical marketplaces in our research, and I am very confident inside 2 years that's going to be 1,000. So that's two metrics right there. One example of an industry where you're seeing this connected commerce come of age and kind of change how people do things. And then just the sheer genre of marketplaces and what they're overtaking is another example of how B2B in general is being changed by this connected commerce equation between buyers and sellers.
Absolutely. And so looking at the marketplace lens and how they've evolved, I know obviously the numbers have increased year over year, and you and your firm, Digital Commerce 360, are tracking this growth. Obviously, I'd imagine Amazon is playing a big role in this, but I'd also like to understand, what manufacturers and distributors can do to prepare, right? I mean, you see Amazon Business coming on. In some cases, I would imagine that manufacturers are actually going to compete with distributors through these marketplaces. So I'd love to get your perspective there on what manufacturers, distributors can do to prepare, and kind of what the next evolution here is in terms of how marketplace will change the current landscape.
You know, that's a the more things change, the more things stay the same. I mean, e-commerce is never going to change. What do I mean by that? What I mean is, if you are, and it does not matter the size of your organization. You could be as big as Amazon Business, as small as some of the very small B2B manufacturers and wholesalers that Paul and I talk to every single day. But the mission is the same. Do you have the product, the expertise, the user experience, the delivery mechanism, the customer service mechanism to deliver what your customer wants digitally? And so the mission has never changed in 20 odd years of covering e-commerce. What has changed is how it's being delivered. So to go back to Amazon Business for a second, they're 35 billion in gross merchandise sales, depending upon whose projection you look at. They've done that in less than 3 years' time. So in the biggest market of industrial supplies or MRO supplies, the Grainger, Fastenal, Global Industrial, MRC world, Amazon Business now accounts for 1 in 4 transactions of that vertical. So that shows you how quickly an Amazon Business can come on and take market share. So, does DG McPherson at Grainger worry about that? Yeah, you bet. And you see that and hear that from time to time on the Grainger calls, because the analysts ask him all those kinds of things. But will an Amazon Business put a Grainger out of business? No. Might they take market share away? You bet. But my point to you is that if you are a B2B seller and you have invested in the right strategy and the right technology that is appropriate for your business, and so you've tailored that to understand your customer, then you're going to grow. If you haven't, that's where you're going to have problems. So manufacturers and distribution companies of all sizes, to get back to your question here, are looking at the same benefit, challenge, opportunity. And some companies like a Caterpillar have been very successful in meeting all the way through that whole customer journey what their customers want. And Caterpillar, they sell something like 2 billion in parts sales a year. But, they're Caterpillar, if you will. But, there are plenty of other small to mid-sized manufacturers that have gone, readjusted their experience, added new channels like new wholesalers and new marketplaces, and they're doing just fine. But what the tie that binds here is figuring out all those channels, those digital channels where the customer interacts with you as a seller. That's the key to success. And that is the benefit and the challenge that a lot of companies are struggling with, and some are doing better than others in meeting. That's where the future is.
Love it. Yeah. I mean, we're seeing a lot of success on our side too, from, the landscape of startup marketplaces. Obviously, it presents an opportunity within certain verticals that haven't experienced digital transformation. Are there any key verticals which you guys are seeing more transformation than others when it comes to jumping on marketplace, creating marketplace? I mean, you had mentioned industrial distribution. Any other key verticals come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, there's a company, and I think your listeners should be aware of this company, Bowery Capital, Bowery Capital. You can find them easily enough. And Mike Brown is the founder of Bowery Capital. So who's Bowery Capital? Bowery Capital knows the B2B marketplace world probably better than anybody else. And they began documenting all of the verticals making the shift to the marketplace movement going back several years. So Mike Brown and company not only invest in these companies because they're an investment firm, but more importantly, they began to recognize which verticals kind of moving out versus which ones were not. So we came across Mike and company, gosh, I don't know, 3-4 years ago. And I've had Mike as a speaker at our Envision B2B show on several occasions. And so uh, he helped us get into tracking in the broader vertical world of B2B marketplaces, chemicals coming along nicely, 12 marketplaces and growing. Uh, Healthcare, nice steady one, been around for 20 years. Automotive, nice steady one, been around for 20 years. Steel coming along. You've got a couple of players there kind of making some inroads. But if you're looking at the verticals where you're seeing the fastest evolution of B2B marketplaces, it's the service world and it's the last mile logistics world. And it's some of those types of marketplaces that kind of bring together buyers and sellers of services where you're seeing the fastest growth. You know, anything from freelance talent to finding brokers to trading blocks of finance. I mean, it's just all over the place. And one important perspective here, the term B2B marketplace is frankly just a generic name for a type of marketplace that basically does e-commerce between buyers and sellers in en masse in a different way. I mean, you guys track them too. There could be as many as 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 definitions of what passes for a B2B marketplace. And it's one more generic term. So there are HubSpots, if you will, of vertical market platforms calling themselves marketplaces. They're integrating big amounts of buying and selling, and logistics and services are two big fast growing worlds of that. That's where I'm finding the most launches these days, by the way. So
Well, it's very cool and great insight. Speaking of buzzwords, obviously, I think a lot of us are tired about hearing about AI, right? I know that you've had some recent experience coming across this at different conferences, but I think a lot of our audience would genuinely be curious on your perspective of how AI has affected the e-commerce market.
what's funny because
Obviously,
yeah, I mean,
yeah, go
it's
ahead.
funny. AI is nothing new. I mean,
Yeah,
if you think about live chat, that's been around forever and a day, right? Maybe the retailers had it first, but on any good B2B site, you're being hit with a chat box. That's AI. That's been around forever. So, you know, I think we're moving past the hype by a fair amount in B2B, but what's happening with B2B AI is two things. First off, there's a big disconnect between what people tell you in a survey versus what they're actually doing. So, our surveys, and God knows how many else I see in a given day, is AI a big deal to you, Mr. Manufacturer, Mr. Distributor, blah, blah, blah? Oh, indeed. How big a deal? Huge freaking deal, Uh, uh, what uses for this do you see? Oh, all kinds of things. Marketing, customer service, merchandising, supply chain, procurement. Great. So you see survey after survey where there is keen interest there, but then you look at the lag time, and I think Whipfly came out with something on this that in their state of manufacturing report from 2 months ago that amplifies this. I have seen other studies, and I forget who from, but there's a lag time because B2B commerce grew at 18% last year. But you know what? B2B spending is still in the funk, and that includes IT spending. And maybe you guys are seeing it too. I don't know, but I can tell you for a fact that a lot of companies are doing. There's a folding pattern on e-commerce technology buying these days because inflation's still not down. There's still kind of this trance in the economy. So a lot of B2B organizations are stuck in kind of, you know, they're just kind of stuck there, still not ready to spend money yet. So even though the intentions are, how big is a new e-commerce platform to you? Huge priority. The disconnect is the priority is there. The spending level is not. So microcosming that on AI is rolling out, but how fast it's going to roll out across the B2B ecosystem, which could be 14 different touch points on a digital technology map, it remains to be seen. So you're seeing it first in marketing, merchandising, personalization, supply chain, and that's been the first wave of the stuff for about 2 years. What's just on the drawing board is where you're going to see it in behind the scenes search engine for transaction processing. I mean the bread and butter of e-commerce stuff, if you will. Farther along, you're going to see it kind of roll out in logistics, fulfillment, order processing, and then kind of the overarching customer service marketing. So it's front and center now in personalization, marketing, merchandising, more so in supply chain too. It's the rest of the ecosystem, including the platform, where you're probably going to see more activity in 6 to 12 months versus now because of this this technology spending funk. I think a lot of organizations are still in. A lot of wait and see out there, a lot of wait and see. So a lot of pent up
Cool.
plans still not being done.
Yeah, and I think that we're still in the current first phase, although
Oh yeah.
much of this has been in production now for several years in reality. But do you have any idea or perspective of what actually the results have been? Like, how is this actually affecting the business to this point with regard to whether it be personalization or search or any of the aforementioned features with AI are currently live in production?
Well, it's funny. If we had done this podcast in a month, I'd have some great war stories for you. But Paul Demery, who your audience I think knows, Paul Demery, for those who don't, has been my friend and colleague and wingman on B2B for 20 plus years. And Paul knows more about B2B e-commerce than even me because he's been at it far longer. And he's probably the most underrated knowledge source and all the stuff that there is out there. And my point to all that is Paul and I got curious about all this AI stuff, and we had not seen any reporting across the entire digital technology ecosystem. So we're breaking that down for some analysis here. And we're reaching out to the vendors, to the users to find out, okay, how real is this stuff? How far along is this stuff? And then when does this actually really hit the market for not just merchandising, marketing, personalization, supply chain stuff? What about the other parts of the enchilada, the transaction processing, the fulfillment, all of that? So We're just beginning to report that now. So we intend to have some findings for the industry in maybe about a month. So right now, I
Awesome.
can't share a lot. In a month, I'm happy to come back on and tell you what we did find. So
So aside from that report, and obviously the metrics therein, how do you think a business can best prepare for this evolution of AI in the e-commerce ecosystem? Is there, particular resources online that you're available or that you're aware that are available, or, where should they start?
well, I'll plug Digital Commerce 360. We do a fair amount of job of covering all this stuff, if you will. But
Sure.
I think the end result is you talk to people like Oro Commerce, you know, vendors, and I don't think that's always been a good term. I think vendor, if you will, to some it's just like, oh, they're trying to sell me stuff. But think about it differently. Technology platform companies, e-commerce technology companies, e-commerce application service development company, which is what you folks are, along with other folks in the genre out there. You guys make the stuff that makes this stuff happen. So you want to know what's going on, go and talk to Oro Commerce, and they will tell you way down the rabbit hole, if you want to go that far, where the technology is, how it works, and where is it going. So I always go to the end user or the start of the food chain to figure out what's going on with this stuff. So Paul and I are talking to folks like you now because you're the ones developing it. You're the ones with stuff on the drawing board. So that's where you start with, and then
Yeah,
you figure out there's other sources out there too.
absolutely. And I mean, I think any good software vendor is utilizing their current customer base to understand, or even prospect base to understand what needs are in the market that aren't available within the product today. And thus that can affect the product roadmap. So I'd say beyond
Obviously,
that, right?
with
There's,
AI though, I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm sorry. With AI though, and I will kick to the curb some of my own surveys. We've done a ton on AI. There is not a lot of ROI information out there just yet because it's still too new. You got to get something live for a year, 18 months, 2 years before you can really see if they'll talk about it, kind of what this stuff is. So there's a lot of, do you intend to use this stuff out there with AI? Yes, we do. And what applications matter first, blah, blah, blah. So there's a lot of tire kicking, a lot of initial work going on, if you will. But, it's probably going to be a couple of 6 months anyway before you start to see, I think, real mainstream results where companies come forth and say, okay, here's my ROI for doing this particular AI application. I don't think we're there yet. It's some of it's there. Don't get me wrong, but in terms of, I could come to you and you would have 3,000 case studies that would talk about, how well companies are doing ROI on your platform, right? It's established. It's a known
exactly
word.
right.
So AI and headless and connected and all of these other emerging technologies, not quite there yet. Give them 6 months, you're going to see some definitive results. We'll find some anyways. So
Yeah. And, with the good, there's always the bad, right? Talking about, or maybe even referring to a bit of the backlash that I've heard in the market, around businesses that weren't prepared to go fully composable. And I know we can unpack that term in a lot of different ways too,
yeah.
but have you seen any of that on your side? Some of these implementations that maybe were oversold in the context of requiring less development teams, or, less architecture to actually build a solution that is, in a way, able to service all those channels that we mentioned earlier?
I'm going to give you a core example here. And I've written about this for a few years. There's a company called State Electric. And State Electric is just a very well run, old guard, established distribution company that sells electrical products. And their VP of everything has been around for 40 plus years, great guy. And he's one of my bellwether companies, State Electric. They have about maybe 60 branches across Ohio, West Virginia, you know, kind of that part of the country. But, they're they're a bread and butter distribution company, been in business for 60 plus years. And they will tell you that they came back from an AD conference several years ago, and the VP marched into the CEO's office and said, "You know what? We got to do e-commerce." The CEO said, "Great, you're in charge. Go do it." And you know what? That began a 3 to 4 year history, and a very expensive one, for how this particular company began its e-commerce journey. So you know what? They went out there, and the first thing they did was they made the core mistake, and they'll tell you this because I've written about it, and they'll tell you this today, that they thought of the e-commerce technology as the be all to end all for the strategy. So the first mistake a lot of companies still make today is that they think that if they focus on the technology, that's the strategy for achieving the e-commerce results they really want. It's just the opposite. Where companies need to kind of flip-flop things is think of e-commerce technology as part of the e-commerce strategy that's going to work for you. So in the case of State Electric, they went and they bought a beautiful platform, did 18 months of testing and this and that, about to go live. And you know what they found out? That their content wasn't ready. They had something like 200,000 SKUs that were dirty data on the back end. There was not a back end integration worthy enough to go into this brand new e-commerce system they spent 18 months perfecting. And this is a very common occurrence even yet today. So you know what? They spent the next 2 years going back and rewriting realistically and thoroughly and painstakingly a taxonomy for B2B search for 200,000 SKUs that took them 2 years to complete, to get the data clean enough to flow into the new e-commerce platform to kind of finally do e-commerce. Now, of course, that was a couple of years ago for them, but there's companies like that all across the roadmap today in e-commerce. There just is. So a lot of companies, manufacturers, distributors, their back end and their data might not be ready for what's to come when they want to pull the trigger on e-commerce platform. So there still is a lack of holistic thinking, start to finish, on the e-commerce journey as it applies to technology. So that's where a lot of companies today are still struggling to figure out how to meet those buyer expectations we've been talking about. The short side is the window for doing that is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. So yeah, more AI, more headless, more connected stuff can put you into a whole new world technology to connect with buyers quicker. But the thing is, if your data's not ready and your platform's not ready, what's the point? So
Yeah, exactly. We've said it for the longest time, right? Is garbage in, garbage out. Um, so
that's still
it,
applicable. But I mean, the thing is, for every worst case user scenario I hear about, I hear of 3 other people that are doing it just right because they took the time, went heads down in, talked to customers, vendors, distributors, the garbage can guy, and they figured out the right strategy for them. That's the way to do it. It's
yeah,
the
I mean, the reality
strategy.
is these,
It's the strategy of the technology that a lot of companies kind of miss the mark on. And that's where if you rethink that, that's where success starts.
yep, I couldn't agree more. And, there's a lot of forums out there now to understand how companies have done it well. I mean,
Yeah.
we'll likely see you in your hometown of Chicago at B2B Online this year. And, of course, I saw that you guys recently launched or are launching B2B specific e-commerce awards with our friends over at B2B EA and Brett Sinclair. Could you tell us a little bit about that actually?
Well, thank you for mentioning that, because for one, they're long overdue. And and for those who don't know, Brett Sinclair is the executive director of the B2B e-commerce organization. And he's from down under. Good eye, and I love Brett, and I could listen to that guy talk all day long,
Yep. It's hard not to. He's
Yeah,
always walking
critters
and talking.
cheers and critters and
Yeah,
everything else, really, Uh, but
absolutely.
Brett had the foresight to come up with the fact that one of the ways to move an industry along is to recognize the thought leaders, the movers, the shakers, the doers, and tell their story. And what better way to do that than with a B2B e-commerce awards program? So we've been talking with Brett for the better part of a year on this. It took us a year to kind of do it, but we're his media partner. So there's 8 different categories that feature big and small, from manufacturer of the year, distributor of the year, B2B retailer of the year, marketplace uh, uh, of the year, best newcomer of the year, those kinds of titles. And it's wide open. Anybody, and I mean anybody, can submit a nomination because we want to recognize, in conjunction with this association, who are the thought leaders out there. They should be recognized and tell their story, because when you learn from what the leaders are doing, that brings to light all kinds of best practices and it moves the industry along. And that's the whole point, so you can find more on B2B. What's Brett's B2B?
EA, I believe.
Yeah. Okay. B2BEA.com, Brett's website.
Yeah.
Whole big thing there.
Yeah. .org. B2BEA.org.
He would kill me if you heard this, but yeah, that's the one. The thing is, my point to you is the more nominations, the better. And it can come from anybody. My cat sitting here can nominate somebody if you knew anybody, so we're trying to get the word out to Orocommerce and
all
anybody out there.
Vendors.
If you know somebody who you think is worthy of a nomination, nominate them.
And that goes for technology partners too. I mean, there's not too many technologies that I find that sit above us in the pecking order of, implementing solutions at this point. I think we've talked about this in past conversations, how e-commerce has become so prevalent, but with, the statement around clean data in, clean data out, and creating a good, user experience. I've said it for the longest time. The reality is that the e-commerce platform is only good as the data it receives, which is why I'd say the ERP platform is, potentially above us in that pecking order. Well, I would admit it is. But there's so many other solutions out there that are so critical to the ecosystem, right? I mean, e-procurement or payment or, again, data cleansing tools like a PIM or a PXM, a DAM, for example. So I mean, there's so many different players out there that can nominate, their clients as a result of still creating a B2B ecosystem, but, their technology plays a role in that ecosystem, right?
Yeah. By the way, it's fun saying damn PIM sometimes, don't you think?
It sure is.
Kind of mix and match your acronym just a little bit there. But yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree. So, I mean, it's funny because each of the last 3 or 4 nights here, I've been kind of going through some of the stories that Paul and I have been doing, and I think I nominated 3 manufacturers last night,
Amazing.
3 marketplaces. Who else did I do? Yeah, it's kind of fun, but
Yeah.
And it's not just the Caterpillars or these big, huge, Boeing. It's not just these big guys. We know a lot of small to mid-sized movers and shakers. And part of what this awards program is meant to do is to recognize thought leadership where it is. And you don't have to be huge to do that. You can be a mover, a shaker, a thought leader by doing what you're doing. And we are looking for those kinds of stories to tell.
Absolutely. And let's be real. It's never a one size fits all here in B2B.
No.
I mean, I've been saying it for the longest time as well. I'm not sure there'll ever be a by and large vendor that is the clear winner or leader in B2B e-commerce. There's vertical specific solutions for a reason. There's composable and monolithic solutions for a reason. It's really interesting because, a mid-market company in the same industry, or even an enterprise company, doesn't matter size, in the same industry could have completely different needs in terms of technology. And as a result, use completely different platforms or vendors.
Well, there's all kinds of stories out there, and a quick one here is the oil and gas fittings industry. The gaskets and exciting stuff like that. There's a company and small world, like a lot of these B2B organizations or industries can be. But my point is, in the oil and gas fittings, hoses kind of world, if you will, there is 14 different companies that compete with one another. But you know what? They needed to do a PIM system pretty fast. And because the time was for it, but none of these companies was big enough on their own, to build a PIM that's going to outdo some of these other PIM. They just weren't that size. What they did is they've got an industry association, and they decided to collectively build a system they could all use, so they all kind of came together and they did what industry should and can do, which is they defined terms and standards and funded a technology partner. So they created a unified platform for them all to compete individually, where technology became the enabler to more B2B opportunity on the e-commerce side versus like, I've got to build one and make my customers use it ahead of you.
Yeah.
So there's going to be more stories like that as newer forms of technology kind of roll out. So it's going to be fun to see how these new technologies, the AI stuff, the headless stuff, the connected stuff, that's going to be mainstream very, very, very quickly here. That's how fast this stuff moves. And I think you guys would know that far better than me, but you know what? That's the new world we're living in. And it comes on a lot faster than the old world. So on we go. So
Absolutely. Well, great. This has been such a wonderful conversation today, Mark. Definitely encouraging our audience here to, nominate your company or your friend's company, anyone that you've found to be a pioneer, mover, shaker, as you mentioned, in the B2B e-commerce world. I think this is important. And, kudos to you and Brett for leading the charge. Any last words for the audience here today, Mark?
yeah, I get this quite a bit, which is, what can I do to grow my e-commerce business? And it's very simple. Listen to what your customers want and then do the best you can to service those digital buyers that are now becoming a critical mass to you. So you don't have to be Amazon Business. Amazon Business is never going to know a vertical as well as a 60-year-old distribution company in HVAC or plumbing or tools or what have you, because you guys do. That's what you do for a living. Just switch to what you're doing more digitally because that's what your customers want. But you know what? Serve your niche and you're going to be just fine. And so those are words to live by that a lot of smaller companies, if they do it successfully, they will conquer e-commerce. No question about it. So there's
Awesome.
plenty of room for everybody is my point.
I'd agree. And plenty of options out there in the market
You bet.
too. So,
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate this.
yeah, it's been really fun. Mark, I wish you a good day. Thank you for joining, and we'll talk to you again soon.
All right. Thanks for having me. Take care. Bye.
Yeah. See ya.
This episode is brought to you by Oro, a leading innovator and provider of customer-driven, powerful, and connected open-source software for B2B digital transformation. Oro seeks to build long-term, trustful relationships with its customers, integrators, developers, and technology partners by empowering people with the best tools to digitalize their business. Find out more at oroinc.com. That's OROINC.com. Thank you for listening to B2B Commerce Uncut, a journey through change, powered by Oro. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a 5-star review and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode.